Hey class, this is Professor Nick Sensky at UNC Charlotte, and this is the first tutorial for Digital Fundamentals, Architecture 6603. And we're going to start by just doing a little like remedial Photoshop and just looking at some of the basic tools and techniques for using Photoshop. This is for the collage assignment, and we're going to start off with a photograph of a cemetery. So this will be maybe this might be something similar to what you'd be doing for your assignment. We're going to be looking at selection tools first, and what I mean by selection is just in general how I am going to choose areas of the screen to move things or to cut things out or to apply different effects. And most basic transparency tools are like you find the rectangular tool. And that's for simply selecting like rectangular areas of an image. That's not always very useful when you're trying to extract things the way that we do here, but that's a general one. The other ones in this kind of in this tool are like the elliptical tool, which is going to produce ellipses. And whenever you have one of these tools, if you want to constrain it to a shape that's the same size in the vertical as the horizontal, so for instance you want to make a circle with the elliptical tool, you want to hold down the shift key, and shift is going to produce a circular area. So like if you wanted to cut out this piece as a circle, so sort of like a family circus or something, right? You might make that area. Actually, we have our image as a background right now, but if we want to move something, if we wanted to make a selection and we try to move something, it's not really going to work too well because we're actually moving the base layer. So what we might want to do is actually create just a blank layer. So you could sort of cut and paste that onto there, and to do a cut and paste with a selection, you can say edit cut, or in Windows like you can do like Control X, or in Mac you could do like Open Apple X. Just need to change the background layer. So do a cut, and then you could paste to that other layer, right? This is the move tool, you probably know. So the first tool up there is for moving things around. This allows us to move it and to do that without disturbing the bottom layer. I'm actually going to go ahead and undo all that. The place that I cut. Okay. So again, if you have a selection tool, if you hold down Shift, it's going to create a constrained form that's equal in width and height. If I put the cursor on the marquee, the thing that's actually that's kind of animated, it's going to turn into a selection move tool, so I can move the selection around. So once I've made a selection, if I have that size and it's still active, it's still animated, I can move it around to a different location. So I can grab these stones. You could also go into select, select transform, and I could take that same shape that I had and I can transform the selection. I can distort it if I want to, so that's kind of useful as well. And like I said, I can do that with a rectangular too. So if I hold down Shift when I have the rectangle, that produces a square. So that's nice if you want to make a shape like a perfect circle or a perfect rectangle. And again, we could always go through to go to Select, Transform Selection, and transform that shape if we want to into something else. Not as useful with a rectangle as it is for an ellipse, but you can also type in that selection. So if I wanted something that was, let's say, 60% of the original size, I could do that directly. Okay. So I could also type in the pixel amounts for it. Let's go ahead and cancel out. So just the basic selection. So those are useful for cutting out a certain size or a certain shape on a rectangle or an ellipse. But if you want to start getting more specific about what we select, we actually want to get into these other tools like the where we have like the polygonal lasso, and the polygonal lasso tool. I'm going to zoom in here really quick. really works well with shapes that have basically like straight up and down edges. So we could get, very carefully click the edges of this church because it's has straight edges. Wouldn't work well for curves for some objects, but it works well if you want to select something. And I realize this is not this is pretty painstaking. There might be other ways to do this, but for this particular shape, because it has basically like polygonal edges, the polygonal selection tool is actually going to be easier than some of the other techniques. And you always want to ask yourself that, say, what's the best tool for the activity that I'm doing? What are the trade-offs, right? And for this instance, the polygonal lasso might work really well for this tombstone that has straight edges. Might not work well for this tombstone with a curve. Would certainly not work well for this pine tree if we were trying to do that, or this kind of topiary. I guess probably not a pine tree. Another thing about the polygonal lasso is that if you hold the Shift key again, it's going to restrict your lines to straight verticals and straight horizontals. And if you're trying to pull something off an image, or you're trying to create a certain shape, that might be actually pretty useful, right? So if this is straight up and down, it would easily, it's not straight up and down, check that out. But we could use that to restrict that to a form. So if we wanted to make a certain shape, holding Shift is going to help us do that. Okay. One point I should mention is when you're making a selection, if you want to stop making a selection, you want to press the Escape key. You want to escape out. That's going to stop that selection that you've made. Okay, that's a really useful thing that you can find out. You can also, if you have a selection that you've already made, just select the roof or something. Really basic, but when you finish it, there's a little circle. You see that says that you're going to close that selection. Okay, that's how you know it's closed. If you click somewhere else once you've made a selection, like once this is animated, it's going to kill that selection. Like that original selection that you made is going to stop. Okay, so that's how you get out of it. So polygonal lasso. The lasso tool is a kind of a free-form lasso, and this is where you can actually it's like actually painting the selection, so you can kind of draw something with it. This is easier with a tablet, but sometimes freeform is kind of what you want. And again, I'm just doing this very quickly, not really paying close attention. But the regular lasso is more freeform than the polygonal lasso, and the same idea. If you close a shape, it's going to turn into a circle, and that'll give you the selection. Okay, and again, if I click anywhere, it's going to stop that. You can actually combine the two. So, like, let's say I'll take a polygonal lasso, and I'm doing this. I should say this. I'm actually holding down the mouse button on these, and that makes this spill out. And then I let go of the mouse, and I'm on the tool, and then it's going to select the tool. So for this tombstone right here, I might start with a polygonal lasso, and click the base of it, and just kind of get all the pieces of it that are rectilinear. Okay, I've got that selection. Then I can switch to something like the lasso tool. And now if I hold the Shift key, you can see a little plus appears. Can you see that on your screens? So that means I'm actually adding to the selection. So I can go through and I can draw with the lasso tool. I can do this more carefully. And then if I close it, that's going to add to that selection. Okay, so now if I cut, I can cut that tombstone out. Okay, and I can paste it on another layer. So this is how I can actually combine the tools to get the kind of use that I want, to get the kind of shape that I want. And again, I'm doing this very quickly, but you kind of get the idea. So let me put this back. And I noticed that I missed, if I zoom in, I missed some of the shape. Another trick, if you're zooming, using the zoom tool, if you hold down the space bar, it's going to let you pan back and forth. So that's kind of useful. See, I actually didn't get all this. So what I could do is I could go back to the polygonal lasso, hold shift to add, and I could just add that bit that I missed. Okay, so you can with a few moves, you don't have to select everything at once. You can always go, and I can always refine this. Here's the thing, actually, if you look at this tombstone, I actually kind of overshot this. I actually selected more than I need. I actually shouldn't have this piece. I need a pan with the space bar here. Same thing up here. So what I can do is I can take the lasso tool and I can remove from a selection. If I hold down the control key. Actually, I made a mistake there. Excuse me. If I hold the Alt key, which is the Option key, so the Alt key, it turns into a minus. So plus to add to a selection is Shift. Alt key is minus to remove from a selection, which is the Option key on your Mac. And if I click this, I can draw with the mouse, and I can remove that piece from the selection. And I can do this here as well. Okay, so the hotkeys are really a good way to control your selections and to really refine what you're doing. Okay, so again, Shift is to add, Alt or Option is to subtract, and it's going to give me a lot more control over what I select. So there I've got a better tombstone. Let's go ahead and zoom out. When you're zooming, if you hold Alt or Option, the zoom turns into a zoom out, so I can zoom out quickly. And let's just quick cut and paste. So that's a better tombstone than I had to remove before. Okay. So again, selection. There's different kinds of selection. Different ways of changing your selection. Okay, so that takes us to that. There's also this magnetic lasso, which you don't put a lot of stock in the automatic tools, because it's the computer has to kind of interpret what you want, and although in some cases it can save you time, I think ultimately you the human are usually a better judge of what you want than the computer is, and sometimes they can make more trouble for you than just doing it yourself. Magnetic lasso tool, if you experiment with it, it looks for contrast between things generally, and this is there's a contrast setting, and frequency is like the number of points that are added to the path. So it's like how often the computer samples what you're doing. You can experiment with these settings, but just show you in practice here. So it's going to attempt to stick to the profile of something and create a selection for you. So if I hold down the mouse and I kind of draw, you can see how it sort of starts to attach itself to the shadow. And as I draw, it's distributing points, and it does a pretty fair job. It works best in areas of high contrast. Yeah, so you can see now it's actually got stuck to that other tombstone in the background. Does a pretty fair job though where there's high contrast. And you see it jumped there too. So actually requires a little bit of finesse as you're drawing as well. So there's my selection, and I could go in though and take the selection, which isn't bad, and I could pan over, and I could take the lasso tool, and I could use the Alt key to trim away at some of this. So maybe in some cases the magnetic lasso could save you a little bit of time. So that's kind of nice, I could go through and I could use this to trim out, this edge. Maybe it would save you some time. And then I could go through and I could add, this piece here. And you can zoom in as far as you want to get that selection. But so anyway, so that's the polygonal lasso. Okay. And then the last batch of selection tools that I want to show you are relatively new, actually. Well, this one's new. It's called the Quick Selection tool. And you're probably familiar if you use Photoshop in the last 4 or 5 years before really the CS series. There's this magic wand tool. And what the magic wand is that it tries to look for areas of similar color, and then it basically creates a selection based on that. So like if I was to I'll use the same example. So if I click the magic wand, actually, oh, I'm in the wrong layer. I gotta make sure I'm in the right layer. Go to background layer. Yeah, see, it's actually selecting quite a few things at the same time. If I go to contiguous, it's going to attempt to keep them all in one place. And you can see it selects most of this shape. Let's go ahead and zoom in a bit. If you hold down if you hold down Shift, you can add to it. So you can keep clicking the magic wand and adding those areas, but see, eventually it spills out. Sometimes it's a good tool. So again, hold Shift. It works really well in these areas of again, high contrast. Yeah, see, it takes the parking lot. It's just really difficult. You can also again, hold Alt and you can deselect areas. You can play with the tolerance, and you can play with the settings, and for some things it's really helpful. It can help you quickly select an area, but not always. The other tool, which is newer, is this quick selection tool, and this is a bit more intelligent. It actually works as a brush, and you can it's kind of a combination of the magic wand and the magnetic lasso, and so like I can kind of paint. I actually already filled that area. But I can kind of paint an area, and it'll attempt to figure out the selection. It works like a brush, in that I can change the size of it. So I can go through and change the size. So if I have a smaller brush, yeah, it's might pick up less, but it's actually picking up quite a bit. It has the same problems though. It's intelligent. It's supposed to be intelligent. But it often ends up choosing more than you want. It's not always faster. See, it works. Maybe you'll see that it just grabs everything. So use it at your own risk. You can also go through with the tool and manually change the settings to subtract from the selection or to add the selection. It has its own kind of settings. So those are some options that might help you use it. But again, I think your kind of bread and butter are really these kind of lasso tools and careful usage of adding and subtracting selections. Not to mention, these kinds of things for creating specific shapes you want. One thing I'll mention is, if you had a particular shape, you could always take a circle, a square, pardon me, and using the Alt subtract. Holding Shift as well. You can actually take a bite out of that piece. Oops. So you can really make a lot of shapes using selections if you'd like. That should probably do it for selections. Once you have a selection, there are a lot of things that you can do with it. These are things that I showed you guys in class, but let's just say, so I just showed you how to kind of subtract something, how to cut it and then paste it to a new layer. Another thing that you could do is I've shown you some examples of maybe doing a color wash. So just to give you an example, I'm going to go ahead and make a selection of this monument, this cross here, just because it's easy to do with the tool that I have. So again, I'm just I'm clicking a lasso, and I'm not going to be too careful with it because I just want to show you this example. And here's a tip I'm going to give you, and I'll point this out a lot, but instead of trying to select all this, it's actually easier to just create a selection that's pretty coarse, and then to go in with another tool like the lasso tool and kind of subtract. Like sometimes it's easier to make a subtraction than an addition in your selection. There. So Okay, so sometimes doing the opposite is actually easier. Okay, and so I've got this selection, and again, I could cut and paste this to a layer, and then I could kind of do what I want with it. I could put it in another document, or I could actually just subtract it from this one. What I'm going to do though is I have a blank layer, and I have this selection, and I'm going to use it. I'm going to make a mask to just color this monument something. I'm going to accentuate this monument, and actually I'm going to use this selection to do a lot of things. But what I need to do first is save the selection. So I have this monument selected. I have the marquee. I'm going to go into channels. So I have this selection that I made, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that selection to do a lot of different things. But I don't want to accidentally, erase it or remove it in the operations that I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go. I have my layers. I'm going to go to channels. Channels tab. You can also just go to Window, Channels, and I've got the selection. I'm going to click this button here, which saves the selection as a channel. And so you can see the channels are the different layers of color that make up the image, the red, green, and blue hues. And so you can see if I turn everything off, or I just turn the alpha. So I have this alpha channel, which is just my selection. So that's actually going to save my selection. So if I go back, I'm just going to turn this off here. I'm going to turn this off, and I've lost my selection. I don't have my selection anymore. If I go to channels and I pick that alpha channel that I saved, and I click this button here, it's going to load that selection. So no matter what, as long as I have this alpha channel saved, I can keep that selection. Okay, and I can do lots of things with that. One thing that I can do is I could go ahead and I could add some color to it. So I've got the selection made. I could go in simply with the bucket, the fill bucket, and I can click on the color swatch, and I can make this like a cyan color, like a very bright cyan blue, just to highlight that. So I could click on. You need to make sure that you're selected on the RGB channel. You can't make any color changes to these alphas. So I'm on a layer, I've got the selection, but I'm on the RGB layer. I can flood this. Oops, made a mistake. Let's change this color here. Again to cyan. There. Okay. Did it again. Okay, so I made my selection. So I filled it with like flat color. What I can do though is I can go in and I can change the transparency. So I can go into the opacity, make it 50%, and that gives me, this blue color. But I can also go in, I could change it to 33. I could, it's one way of highlighting it. What I can do though also is, besides just changing the opacity, I can go into the transparency type and I can change that. So there's different kinds. Multiply. So you can see it's actually different to multiply this, which is, it's basically like preserving the contrast of the image, but then applying the color. It like literally multiplies the like pixels to get the new color. If I go to normal, okay, so keep that in your head. That's multiply. If I go to normal, 50%, do you see how much duller it is when I'm just applying a transparency? Okay, it's different when you apply multiply. You get a much like richer contrast. There's different types we can talk about these in class, but like one is like overlay, which is a different way of creating the color in the image. It brings out much more of the white. Soft light, hard light is actually going to wash out quite a bit. Linear burn, which is a little bit different than multiply slightly. So I'm going to experiment with those layer types and get a sense for what they do to the image. But the most useful ones to me are multiply and for dark images, and really overlay. Okay, for like lighter effects. Okay, so I have that. So I can do that. Another thing that I can do is let's make a duplicate of this background, because I want to make a copy of it so that if I make any changes to it, I still have the original background. So I've got the background. I can go through to image and desaturate the image. So I can go to image, adjustments, and desaturate, and that's actually going to create, this is not, it's like a black and white, but in fact what I've done is I've removed all the color information, and so I've got, so this is actually interesting, so I've got my tombstone that's highlighted now, okay, because I had that selection. So that's interesting. Another thing that you could do, let's just kind of, I'll show you another example. So I've got my, I've got this scene. I'm going to go ahead and just roughly make a selection. This is not very good, but I'm going to do it to the kind of short point here. So I'm going to take this church structure, and I'm using the polygonal lasso. Okay, so I've got that. Go to channels, right? Click on the save channel button. So I've got the alpha channel now. Okay, so I saved my selection. Then I'm going to go through and make another copy of the original background layer and turn off the other one. Okay, so here's a really powerful thing you can do when you have a selection. So again, just like when I did the kind of positive and then I subtracted from it to get the shape, sometimes it's easier to select part of the image, but then the image part you want to change is the opposite of it. You want to do the inverse of it. So I want to keep this building red, but I want to make everything else black and white, let's say. Okay, so I could go through, and this is my selection, the churches. Okay, I can go to select, invert, and now everything else is selected. You can see the border, everything but the church is selected. And so then I can go into image, desaturate, and so everything else is black and white. Okay, so then that building is actually going to stand out more. Another thing I can do though is, okay, so I've done that. What I can do is I can go to the channels. I'm going to pick my alpha channel, add it as a selection. I'm going to go back to that image. Actually, I need to go back to my RGB here. Okay, go back to the image that I did with the red chapel, and I want to accentuate that chapel. Okay, I could add a layer of color to it like I did with the tombstone, but another thing I can do is, okay, if I can desaturate, I can increase the saturation too. So if I go to image, adjustments, hue saturation, so I've got the church selected, I go to hue saturation, I can increase the saturation slider. It's a little crazy, but I can make it, more vibrant, more red. That's something I can do. I can also go into the hue. I could shift the color of it. I'm not sure how I want to do that, but it's possible. But for now, let's maybe add some color to it. Really bring it out. And again, what I'm doing is more of a study. It's not real. It's not really meant to represent what's really there. And then I'm trying to make a case about this. I'm trying to bring it out more, accentuate it more. And so this kind of thing is kind of like an archigram. Like I'm kind of artificially saturating it, coloring it more. So you could do that. I can undo that though. Another thing I could do is if I got the selection, I could go into adjustments, brightness, contrast, and I could increase the contrast of it to bring it out. I could increase or decrease the brightness of it. And I could do the other thing too, where I could invert the selection again. Again, go to brightness, contrast, let's say, and I could decrease the contrast of everything else. Increase the brightness of it, fade it out of it. And again, this building is going to stand out more than it did in the previous image. Okay, so just to backtrack again, so we can select things, save them as channels, so that we have the selection area whenever we want. Oops, sorry. Click on the alpha, and you've got the selection. I can go back to my other one. I've got that selection as well. Okay, so it's really useful to do that. Then I can go in And with that selection, I can do various kind of image effects. I could go through and again, I desaturated, I change the saturation, I can change the brightness or contrast. There are all kinds of effects that you can do to the image. You could apply a filter to different parts of it, but by selectively altering parts of the image, we get a more interesting way of looking at things in that image. Okay, so so I've shown you just a couple of basic techniques for selection, for extracting things from an image, which again, you could cut and paste into new images. You could save them onto layers so that you can add them back later. Okay, I showed you how to make like this tombstone. How to use the bucket to create a color film, and then lastly, I talked about these kind of image effects, as a way of singling out areas of an image. Another thing you could do too is you could go through with that alpha, select it, and you could do a thing where you actually, excuse me here, where you could invert, the image. So if I go through the channels here, yep. It's like an invert. And this is getting into kind of like the Wadsworth stuff that I showed you guys. But that's an idea. You could go through. Actually, it's more effective with this layer. So if I went through and I said image, can I pick the background? Image, invert. Right. This is kind of like the effect that we saw in the other one. Just delete that. Again, if he made bands of one of these pieces. Invert that. That would actually be might be something interesting. It'd be interesting to take the images that you've done, different effects too, and you could cut a piece of the image out. So one layer or the other. So again, this is kind of like a Wadsworth. What it's doing. If you take the image that's above it and you take an eraser to it, so you can take the eraser tool. It's over here. And make sure you've got a brush selected that's soft, so one of these fuzzy ones, you can change the size of the brush. If you hold down the shift key, you can restrict your motion to horizontal, and you can actually kind of airbrush. So you get kind of a smoother transition, so you're erasing like one layer to transition to another, and that's kind of how Wadsworth makes those smoother transitions between things. Okay, so you're kind of cutting. You can select and then you can clear. You can go to edit, clear, which is just like erase. You can press like the delete key on your keyboard to remove pieces of an image. So if I select this piece, press delete, I can remove that piece. Okay, so I can see what's on the other side of the image. You can go through and you can play with the transparency type. It's actually kind of interesting to see what multiply does versus normal. So, these kinds of effects. Oops, sorry. Let's go back to normal here. So, again, with these layer effects, that's kind of an idea. Kind of like superimposing images on each other. So, there are lots of techniques that you could apply. But this covers the basics of what I wanted to talk about for this week. Be sure to bring any questions you have to class if there's something that you'd like to go over. And, I do recommend you take some notes on it, like what the commands are, what the effects are, and just kind of keep a record for yourself. And then, bring anything you want to lab. If you've tried to work on something and you've got ideas you want to try out, let me know. If something isn't clear in this talk, I know it's a little disorganized, but bring that to class with you. When we come in on Thursday, we're going to be talking about masking and how to make even more precise selections which is really helpful for organic objects like trees and people. And we'll be looking at how to make the transitions between those objects look better, so they look less less photoshopped. Um, so anyway, look forward to that on Thursday. But thanks very much. I'll see you in lab.